Hi everyone. As mentioned in the coffee video this past week, we're going to be addressing the question of announced and unannounced Mass intentions. I'm going to do it over the next three videos, these short videos. The first one today is going to introduce the change that we're talking about, and then speak a little bit about the history behind the practice of offering Mass intentions. Next video, we're going to talk a little bit about the theology behind the whole thing, both positive and negative. And the third video will be looking at some pastoral concerns that led us to make this decision. So what is this decision that we're making? Basically, we're going to do away with the distinction between announced and unannounced Masses. In fact, we're no longer going to have announced Masses connected with specific offerings for that Mass. I'll explain what all this means. First of all, let me explain the difference between an announced Mass and an unannounced Mass. Now, when I say an unannounced Mass, we basically are referring to the custom that many of us grew up with, where you can get a Mass card for someone. You basically make an offering, you get a Mass card, and basically it's a kind of promissory note, in a sense, that at some point in time, in some place, some priest in some church is going to offer the Eucharist for that intention. And generally, you don't know when and where that's going to happen, because it could happen locally here. The Mass intention could be given to a retired priest who could be sent overseas to the missions. That was often what happened. It helped to fund the missionary work of the church. You could be assured that Mass was going to be said, because canon law actually requires priests to keep track of these intentions. So the church has been, over the centuries, very careful with these things. So that's the guarantee. Mass will be offered, you don't know when and where. An announced Mass is when you make an offering and you choose a date and place, usually a date, and you might want to do that because it's the anniversary of a loved one, of their passing, a date that's special for you, so that you can come in person or even invite your family and friends to come as well. Generally, it's called an announced Mass because at some point the Mass intentions are actually public. There's a publication. Traditionally, this was done on a bulletin, a printed bulletin, or on a bulletin board, which basically just said, on this day, Mass will be offered for the intention of this person. An announced Mass doesn't necessarily mean that the name is announced during the celebration of the Mass, although that can also happen. It can be done at the beginning of the Mass. You've probably experienced that. It can be done during the prayers of the faithful, and even in special circumstances, the name can be spoken during the Eucharistic prayer. That doesn't necessarily have to happen for it to be an announced Mass. All that needs to happen for an intention to be announced is that its connection with a particular time and place is publicized in some way. Okay, there's the distinction. Okay, so what is the decision? We're basically doing away with announced Masses. Now, before you panic, that doesn't mean you can't still have a Mass card or have Masses offered for particular intentions, okay? So that can still happen, as always. But what it means is that making your offering to get a particular intention for a particular Mass at a time and place, we're not going to do that anymore. Now, before you panic, you might say, well, does this mean that I can't have on the anniversary of my father's passing, I can't have him prayed for at Mass? Here's the point. Yes, you can. We're still going to do that. We're just not going to charge you $10 for it. Okay? So think about that. So if you have a particular date that's special to you and your family, an anniversary, you want to come and have your parent or your loved one's name mentioned at Mass, prayed for during the prayers of the faithful, we can still do that. We can continue to do that. You just call the office and let us know, and we'll take a note, and we will pray for you and your family during that particular Mass. You don't have to pay us $10. Okay, you're probably a bit confused now, aren't you? Well, that's why over the next number of videos, I'm going to look at the history, the theology, and some of the pastoral concerns we have around this practice to help you understand what we're not going to do and what we are going to do and why that's the case. So I've only got a couple of minutes left in this video. Quick thing about the history of this practice. Basically, the history of offering Mass really was connected with the move from celebrating the Mass on the Lord's Day, which the early church did on Sunday, which was the first day of the week. Remember, everyone else went to work, the Christians celebrated the Eucharist because it was the day of the resurrection. And eventually, Mass started to be offered on another day of the week. But daily Mass was something that didn't really start until it was connected with the beginning of the monastic movement, where you had monks, and they dedicated their whole days to prayer. And daily Eucharist, daily celebration of the Eucharist became more common. Also at this time in the monastic communities, when one of the members died, they started a custom on particular anniversaries, at particular number of days, 7 days, 40 days, once a month, etc., of offering Mass to pray for the deceased person. Now, the whole theology of praying for the deceased, I'm going to talk about that in the next video. But this is to say that this is where this custom came from. It was connected with the growth of the monastic movement. Now, in the Middle Ages, two things happened. You had an increasing consciousness of the call to pray for those who were deceased or those who were living, and the concept of what was called the fruits of the Mass, that the celebration of the Eucharist was a powerful form of prayer that you could have an intention connected to. And we saw as the monastic movement continued to grow throughout Europe, especially the nobility would often, in their land holdings, would often fund a monastery. And so it wasn't uncommon for noble lords to have a neighboring monastery, and they would be benefactors of that monastery. And you'd start to have these customs of, okay, if I give you land or I give you X amount of money, can you guys offer Mass for my relatives for the next 5 billion years? And so here's a big chunk of money, and that money helped to fund the monastery. Okay, so that's where that came from. Coming into modern times, obviously we're not monks, we still continue to do this, but it is a very practical origin, and it has to do with basically funding the mission, or at least funding the ministry of the ordained. Because believe it or not, prior to the late 60s, early 70s, in most places, diocesan priests did not receive a salary. They received a small stipend, maybe a small stipend to operate a car, but it wasn't uncommon for such things as this to happen. And in some places today, it still happens. The priest basically gets to keep the Easter collection and the Christmas collection, which, if depending on the parish you're in, is like cha-ching, right? If you're in a big, huge parish that's well off, you were in the money. If you were in a poor parish, a small parish, you were lucky if you could feed yourself. And so that's why traditionally the big parishes were given to senior clerics who had put their years in. They had been in the trenches. They had been in the small parishes. They had done their time, and this was what they worked up to. And the other thing besides such things as keeping maybe 2 collections a year, there was the Mass stipend. And so basically, if you think about it, the origin of the Mass stipend was basically the priest says Mass once a day. And so the stipend was basically, it was your food money. Basically, it allowed you to feed yourself every day. That was the connection. Of course, $10 today wouldn't go too far in terms of feeding yourself. But that was the origin of a daily Mass stipend, okay? A daily Mass stipend. And for reasons that we'll go into in the next video, the church limited the number of stipends that could be received to one each day. And so if you think about it, once priests started receiving salaries and other benefits, it kind of made the real reason for the Mass offering, the stipend, it kind of made it redundant. So that's why the offering amount has not really increased with the cost of living, because it doesn't need to. And in most places, it's kind of like a supplement to a priest's salary. So that's a bit of the history behind it. And in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the theology behind it. So I hope you can join us. God bless.